Greetings to everyone. We are so glad to be here with you, our family again. Big hugs to everybody. So, all the guests that you've seen us have, we have such a good time with them. But have you ever really wondered what it's like to be a psychic? Especially one who has had many long times of being a psychic. What would that be like? What would your experiences be? I know from doing Akashic Records, there's so many experiences that I have. I can't even imagine telling them to everybody or who'd have the time to listen. But here today, we are going to listen to some amazing stories from an amazing lifelong psychic and teacher, Robert Lindsy Milne. Welcome to Spirit Sessions, Robert.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. I've been looking forward to our conversation and thinking about what we could talk about. I have a few things. You can certainly lead me. So.
That's awesome. We are excited that you're here. I mean, I first heard you on Jim Perry's Euphonet, which I always kind of troll to find guests for us because he's a great interviewer and he does such great work.
Jim Perry?
Jim Perry, yeah. And he's been on our show a couple of times. He's a friend of ours. We really enjoy his presence, and he always has such spectacular guests like you. And I was fascinated to hear your story. And like you have been a psychic in Canada, working psychic for almost 60 years. I know it's 59.
59 come this January.
Which is amazing.
It blows me away when I think about it. Like 59 years is and in that time period, by the way, I've connected psychically or done psychic connections more than 100,000 over that 59-year process.
So incredible.
And what you have to realize in Canada, and I don't know if it's the same in the States, it wasn't legal till just like 20 years ago, maybe.
Well, actually, it got legalized in July 1st, 2019. The Witchcraft Act was repealed. And on the same bill, our prime minister also legalized cannabis as well. I don't know if there was a connection.
But that's funny.
But that is what happened on July 1st, 2019.
That's pretty amazing. And oh my gosh, I think I've been doing stuff illegally for a few years. Not the cannabis. Not the cannabis.
I was going to say the readings, right?
Yeah.
I do have to confess, I broke both laws frequently.
Well, you were in Toronto and downtown. So
and never once did I get arrested. Charged.
Yeah.
Although on a few occasions I was encouraged by police to help them in cases, and if I didn't, they would prevent me from doing readings or arrest me or charge me.
Oh, so you did them under duress?
Oh yeah.
Wow, that's you got to help it. Yeah, it's amazing how they figure we're your last ditch, but then you're not really last ditch because you open up their minds, right, to different things as well.
And I've been pretty successful with anything of those that I got involved with. One of the things though is I always stipulate still, if I work on something like that, nobody knows that I was involved, and nobody knows the psychic was involved.
Or they could say unknown sources.
Absolutely, I don't.
Confidential informant.
Yeah. Well, it's more self-protection. I don't want really to be known to do that kind of work. Most of the time that I've been involved, it's been an unhappy ending, and it would be it's perhaps a relief for the family, but it's an unhappy ending, and I really haven't got whatever it takes to regularly tell somebody or people, their child or their husband or their wife or isn't alive. I just don't have that that character part. I can see it. I just have trouble doing it.
That's fair.
I mean, that would be a real. I mean, yeah, that would be the really hard part of the. I mean, when the police are involved, it's not usually a good ending to start with, right?
We don't get called in. We don't get the first call. We usually get the ones near the end, and that's when you enter into something near the end, it usually doesn't have a good ending.
Yeah, that would be hard. It would be hard to be anyone on there. But so tell us a little bit how you got started. Because were you always psychic? Did you know you were always psychic?
Yes, indeed. I didn't actually know. I just simply was. My first conscious memory, I was in kindergarten or grade 1. So that would be in the mid-1950s. And I came home from school for lunch, and I said to my mother, Grandma Harris died today. And Grandma Harris, by the way, was my great-grandmother, only had met her once, and she, at the time she was living in England. So I wouldn't have been thinking about her at 5 or 6. So I said, Grandma Harris died today. My mother got angry with me, yelled, and probably hit me and she said, don't say bad things. And the next night at dinner, because time or, news traveled slowly in the 1950s. It took days to find out what was going on in the old country. And the next night at dinner, my mother said to my father, Grandma Harris died yesterday. And I thought my dad was going to get angry with my mother for saying bad things. And to my astonishment, they talked about it and nobody got into trouble. And I used to say things to people, and I would, Uncle Harold, that wasn't Aunt Sally. Who was that woman? Well, that one definitely got me hit. And I didn't understand. So in the early days, I learned to keep quiet. And as time went on, though, I started becoming more and more aware. And I think I was about 9. My father took me to an NHL hockey game, a Stanley Cup game. Toronto and Boston were playing, and the score was tied. By the way, the series was tied 1-1. The score was 1-1 at the end of the third period, and the game went into overtime. And when the teams just came on the ice for the first overtime period, I was immediately attracted to number 17 with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Gary Eman. And I knew he was going to score. The game hadn't even started, but I knew Eman was going to score. And then as, the teams are kind of warming up and stuff, it became more and more powerful, the feelings, till it wasn't that he was going to score, it was that he did score, but the game hadn't started. Anyway, the referee blows the whistle, the lights get turned down in the building. There's like 18,000 people in the building. The starting lineups on the ice. Eman wasn't in the starting lineup. He was on the bench. And just as the referee was about to drop the puck and the entire building was silent, I couldn't hold it in anymore, and I jumped up and started yelling and screaming and cheering for Eman because he scored the winning goal. And the entire building looked at me and my dad. And he put his hand on my shoulder and said, sit down. And I did. And anyway, the game started. It was kind of a blur. And then a couple of minutes later, Gary Eman jumped over the boards, and a guy named Red Cully passed the puck to him, and then he tipped the puck into the net. and the entire building erupted. And there I was looking around, realizing that other people didn't see it. And that's when I understood why things were happening to me when I said things. And that was the beginning of it.
That's amazing. I mean, number one, that the Toronto Maple Leafs won. Well, I'm sorry, I'm a lifelong Leafs fan too. Sure. I remember the last Stanley Cup. That's how old I am. But I had to go to bed early because but no, that's amazing.
So that was when I knew other people think differently, and that's how I perceived it. And you know, I wasn't particularly spiritual in those days. You know, I was like 9 years old, and we were, you know, my dad was, you know, really a sports fan and Toronto Maple Leafs, and my sister and I, we used to go to, we'd get an allowance of 25 cents every week. And that first game I talked about just now was on a Thursday night, and then Saturday night they were playing in Toronto again. And we always got our allowance on Saturday, and we'd get our quarter and go to the Fox Theater and, you know, go to the movies and, you know, get popcorn and a drink. And that would be what we'd do with our quarter. Wow. And that morning when I went to get my allowance, I said to my father, Boston's going to win tonight. And he said, no way. And I said, well, I'll bet you a quarter that they do it. Right. And he took the quarter back from me. I didn't get to go to the show that day, but that night I had doubled my allowance. And over the years, as a kid, I doubled my allowance quite often, and I got so good at it. I was worried about getting caught, so sometimes I'd let him win. My father went to his grave not believing in psychism, which only was a couple of years ago.
Wow. And
so it was easy.
Believe you had a gift all that time?
Well, no. And I don't think I have a gift either. But he believes and said often that he would go to his grave believing his only son was a fraud and a charlatan. He believed that. He also said that I was the only guy he ever met that never had a job as well. And that certainly wasn't a compliment. And the way I developed over the years and the values and the morals that I developed and now still have were based on proving what I do is legitimate and honest. Like for example, even when I was a child working at the tea rooms, I always guaranteed, still do, guarantee the readings I do absolutely forever. So if I do a reading for you, if I did a reading for you 30 years ago, and you came to me today and said, you know, I just am not satisfied with that reading you did 30 years ago, I apologize and I just give them the money back. Or whether it was yesterday or 30 years ago. And I guarantee that absolutely. You don't get another reading. But I do that because in the beginning, I wanted to prove to my dad that I was legitimate. And so I have a lot of values that are extreme, you know, to one level or one degree, simply because I wanted to prove I was legitimate. And then I got to the point where I accepted I would never be believed by my father, and then I just stopped trying. But I still had the values and ethics in place.
What about your mom? Did she realize you had a gift? Was she more accepting?
Once again, well, no, she didn't. But I don't believe that I have a gift. I think I have a talent I think I have an ability that I've dedicated and committed my life to making it as good, as strong, as powerful as it can get. But I don't believe that I am any more gifted than almost anyone else on the planet. And if anyone would put the effort into the way I've done, they would do similar things as good, and the younger people actually, hopefully, even better than what I do, which is what I really truly would like to see, the younger generation coming up, surpassing everything and anything that
I think they will. Yeah.
So you figure it's like a talent, something that maybe all of us have to one degree or another?
Almost. So if you think about, let's put everybody the entire human population on a bell-shaped curve. At one end of the bell-shaped curve, there is one person that has absolutely zero awareness. And then at the other end of the bell-shaped curve, there's a person that has absolutely 100% awareness. And the rest of us fit somewhere in between. And I believe that it is a natural, normal instinct that we humans, that actually most mammals have. And it's that part of our intuition that has caused us to survive and make it out of the caves. And I used to teach a one-day seminar. I've got a psychic seminar coming up soon. I used to teach a one-day in-person seminar, and I guaranteed anyone who sits in that seminar one day, if they do what I show them what to do, I guarantee them that before the day is over, they will be able to do a psychic reading for a stranger, the same way that I do. No cards or crystal ball or palm or any medium, just simply getting in touch with their inner self. So I think my gift is my determination, perhaps, my resilience. I think if there were ever a gift, that would be it. But I don't think that I'm particularly gifted, just because I'm a psychic.
So you're like a musician who's practice.
Absolutely. And when I was 15 and a half, well, actually when I was 14 and a half, I was homeless in Toronto. And I survived on the streets using my psychic intuitive skills. I survived that way. I got picked up when I was in my the first time on the street, when I was 14 and a half. I left in November of that year, and the police caught me in April and took me home. And then in later the following year, I left again and never lived at home with my family ever again. And in those days when living on the street, I always used my instincts. And it was where I really sharpened my skills. And so I forget where I was going to go with that. So when I heard that if you worked at the Cozy Tea Room, which was a pretty famous place in Toronto at the time, they offered tea leaf and card readings. I heard that if you worked at the Cozy Tea Room in the afternoon, you would get, well, besides getting paid at the end of the day, they'd give you a sandwich and a cup of tea and some cookies. And then if you worked in the night shift, you got a hot meal and a cup of tea and cookies, and you got paid. And it was January 17th, 1965. I called the Cozy Tea Room and spoke to Mrs. Cox, the owner, and told her that I could do readings. And I showed up there that day, and I did a reading for Mrs. Cox and got hired. And I had never, and I still don't use a medium. I just tune in. But I had to do a tea leaf reading and I had to do a card reading. And I had never even looked into a teacup. And all I did was I took the teacup in my hands, put it in front of me, my face kind of like this. And I was pretending I was looking in the teacup, and I just looked at her and did a reading. And then I put the cards down, I put my cards on the table and looked at them. I had no idea what they meant. But, you know, I was kind of a smooth talker even as a kid. And I just incorporated what I thought the 7 of hearts would mean if I were being psychic, and I would just incorporate that with something that I would be saying to her. Anyway, I got that job and I started working there. And I worked there until I was about 21. And there were most, you know, like I worked 5 days a week, sometimes 6. And then sometimes on Sundays, the holiday, I would go out and do private parties. And in those days, you know, some days I would see 35 or 40 people, you know, wow. They were 10-minute readings. And then there would be days that I would see 10 or, you know, something like that. And that was my basic training for 5-6 years. And when I was around 21, I left the tea room. For a lot of reasons. And I heard that when a young man becomes a priest, they make a vow to say a mass every day of their life. And I decided then, if I was going to do this for my lifetime, I made a vow that I would do a psychic reading or practice doing a psychic reading every day of my life. And I made it for more than 30 years without missing a day. And then, but, you know, as I was getting to the 27, 28, 29th year, I was wondering, what would it be like if I didn't do a reading? So one day I took a day off and didn't do a reading. And then the next day I did. And up until just recently, the longest I've been without either practicing or doing a reading was from April 6th this year to, I don't know, it was about May 10th or something like that. That's been the longest time I went without doing a psychic reading.
Amazing.
Yeah. And it was, I actually, during that time, this year, I actually didn't even think about it. It was also the first time I'd never thought about doing it too. So that's, and it's practice, practice.
Well, say like 50 years ago.
50? Yes, I was doing it then.
Yeah.
I'd had 9 years experience.
9 years experience by that time. So say 50 years ago, there wasn't a lot of psychics out in the public because it was illegal. And there wasn't a lot of mentors for you. So you had to do it on your own. There wasn't like you could go, and there wasn't even very many books out at that time, was there?
There wasn't. It was the beginning of the new age.
Right.
Although there were groups around. And when I was in my late teens, a Canadian financier, these days they would have been, you know, like billionaires. He supported an organization called the Toronto Society for Psychical Research.
Oh, yes.
And he hired Dr. George Owen, who was a retired professor of mathematics from Oxford University. And he and his wife started the Psychic Society, you know, Toronto Society for Psychical Research. And I participated in experiments in doing that. So I was involved with groups but as a kid, and being involved in psychic experiments and things like that.
Well, they had some really, really interesting experiments where they made something up and kind of showed up in the house.
Sure.
But that was really interesting. Were you in on that one with the tables lifting and stuff?
With the Toronto Society for Psychical Research? No, I wasn't involved with that one. Okay. And I've also, I'm pretty simple in my work. What I look for is the answer. And people say, well, are you a medium? Well, no. Are you a channeler? No. Are you clairvoyant? Well, maybe. What I simply do is focus on the answer, and in mathematics, in arithmetic or mathematics, if you come up with the answer, you don't get very many points. You get the points in math by knowing how you got the answer. In my job, you get the points for knowing the answer. And it was irrelevant how it happened. What is relevant is that it happened. So I didn't worry, and still don't worry, about what I'm called, or well, sometimes I do, but when it comes to being the psychic part, I don't care what it's called. In fact, I encourage people, forget about putting a label on what you do. Focus on getting the answer. When you start to label something, I am clairsentient, but I don't channel, or I'm this, but I'm that, or I'm a psychic medium, or when you're focusing on that, you're using a different part of your brain than where you get the information from. And the information comes from our intuitive side and our middle brain, not our analytical brain. And when you're worrying about what it's called, and then you're missing what it really truly is. Well, that's my feeling. And what I focus on is getting the answer. However, I've been involved in all kinds of experiments. I found lost people, dead people. I've worked with, done work with the RCMP in the security service. I connected with a real live Russian spy on behalf of the psychic, the RCMP. I've found lost people, but I do it the same way, with the same intensity or the same skill. I look for the answer. I don't look for the technique.
Right.
And so
right?
That's right.
It would limit you.
I look for the that's correct. I have completed in my lifetime more than 100,000 psychic connections, and the more I do it, the greater I get at it. So I'm doing things now. So I don't right now have the same kind of energy I had, say, when I was 25. And I was the first Canadian psychic to appear on radio and TV shows doing call-in. And I was like, and the way it happened, incidentally, I'd left the tea room, and almost starved. And I was living at this Fleabag hotel. It was called Larry's Hideaway. And I wasn't making a very good living. And one of the old guys that worked on the front desk suddenly died. And I went to the owner of the hotel, and I asked him, could I take Whitey's job? It was a night job. Could I do Whitey's job? But I don't want to get paid. I'll work for room and board. And he gave me that job. And then I was able to concentrate and really get into focusing and practicing. And I did that. And when I was living at this hotel, it was really a flea bag. And I looked around and thought, this is not what I imagined for me to do. And, you know, my clients were street people, women of the evening, not that they're bad or anything, but it wasn't what I thought I really wanted to do. And I thought to myself, so we're talking about early 1960s. And I was thinking, if I can do readings for people in front of me, could I do readings on the telephone? And there's one way to find out, and that's do them. And I started calling friends, and I would practice doing readings on the telephone. Well, actually, it had to go through the hotel switchboard. And I would practice doing psychic readings for friends. Then I would ask my friends to ask their friends if I could call them and practice doing psychic readings. And I did that for a little bit more than a year. And then I just started passing out my name to people. If you want a psychic reading, call me here. You know, and I'd get phone calls in the middle of the night. Hey, it's Joe, what can you tell me? And, you know, I'd go from asleep to awake, do something psychic, and then go back to sleep. And I did that for another little while. And then I said to myself, how can you get paid? Because there were, you know, people didn't have credit cards in those days, and nobody was going to would have let me be somebody that has a MasterCard or it was ChargeX in those days. ChargeX, they wouldn't me be that. So I thought, if I can do a reading on the telephone, could I do a reading on the radio on the telephone? And there was only one way to find that out. And at the time, a friend of mine had just moved from Orillia, Ontario, which is a small city, 120 kilometers north of Toronto. And I phoned that radio station. It was either CJ or CFRN. And the talk show, it was a little wee rinky-dink station. Talk show host name was Rusty Draper. He was the program director, morning man, and talk show host. And I phoned him and said, my name is Robert Lindsy Milne. That was the first time I used that name. And incidentally, that is my real name. My name is Robert Lindsy Milne, and I can be on your radio show, and I can do psychic readings for your callers. And he was kind of like a hard-nosed guy. And he said to me, if you can do what you say you can do, you're on my show tomorrow morning at 10 after 9. And if you can't do what you say, you're off my show at 20 after 9. But other than that, come on up. And I didn't have any money. And that night, and nowhere to stay. And I hitchhiked up to Orillia the day before. And I slept in the park the night before, and I swam in Lake Couchiching for my shower. And that radio station was broadcasting their talk show from Howard Johnson's hotel because they wanted to market and promote their restaurant, which was doing really badly. So Rusty told me to be at the radio station by 8:45 in the morning. And when I got there, like I said, I'd slept in the park and swam in the lake. And, I looked a little scruffy, and, maybe, there was a hesitation of letting me in the building, but I said I was with Rusty. And when I went into the restaurant, there was nobody there except for the technicians setting up the equipment. So we go on the air. Rusty is giving me a little bit of trouble. He's being a bit of a jerk. I was only early 20s, 3 maybe. And then he said, if you're so darn psychic, tell me something about me. And I just said off the top of my head, somebody with red hair with a name like Richard's son seems really important to you. And he just looked at me and his face turned white. And he said, nobody knows that. And then he said, let's start taking calls. And then we started taking calls. And people were calling in. And since those first days, even now, up till now, the way I do my work, when I perform like that, I ask people, tell me your first name, where you're calling from, have a question in your mind, please don't ask it. So people were calling in, they were from Aurelia. And I would just off the top of my head say things to them. And they were right. And, 15, 20 minutes into the show, people started showing up at the hotel, in the restaurant. And by about 9:45, the restaurant was filled. The show was only supposed to go till 10. And I saw Rusty during a commercial break talking with some guy wearing a suit. And then Rusty said, could you stay over from 10 to 11? And I said, oh, sure, I can do that. And then there was a lineup in the hallway. And then they cleared the place and they filled the restaurant again. And then at about 9:45, and in those times, people were coming up to the platform, and I was answering questions, giving them their information and doing calls. And at about 9:45, Rusty looked at me again and said, can you stay on till noon? The show was only supposed to be on from 9 till 10. And I said, oh, sure, I can do that. And again, they cleared the restaurant, and there was just a lineup of people trying to get in because nobody had ever done that before. Certainly not in Canada. It was unheard of. And then, and so it was just coming off the top of my head, just like crazy. So at around 20 to 12, I looked over at Rusty and said, I can't do anymore. I'm burned out. Show ends at noon. And when I got up to walk away, people just charged the front, the platform. And I was completely encircled with people yelling questions at me. And I was just really spaced out. I was really having trouble, just getting my thoughts together because I had done something I had never imagined could be done or would be done. It just happened. And after a few minutes, I was truly overwhelmed. And Rusty and the guy wearing the fancy suit, they came over and each one of them grabbed one of my arms and just pulled me away. And we ended up in the owner's office. And Rusty said to me, can you stay over and be on the show tomorrow? And I said, well, no. And to be honest, I just have to tell you that, I hitchhiked up yesterday and I slept in the park and I swam in the lake and I'm just really tired now and I'm hungry. I haven't eaten since yesterday and I just want to go home. And the owner of the hotel said, well, we can take care of that. And Rusty said to me, do you do readings besides, on the radio? And I said, yes, I do. And the guy that owned the hotel said, if you stay over, I won't charge you. You just please just stay over. And then Rusty said, we'll have one of the girls who work at the radio station will book appointments. And then he said, how much do you charge? Well, in Toronto, I charge $5 a reading. And I just looked at Rusty and said, $25 a reading. And Rusty said, you'll never get that here. And I said, I don't care. Because there was a big leap between Larry's Hideaway Hotel and, that the hotel I was staying at. I did the show the next day, and they booked 125 readings.
Wow.
And
that'd be a lot of money for you in those days.
Oh, it was unbelievable amount. And there was no overhead at all. It took me about 12 days to do all those readings. And while I was doing those readings, I was thinking to myself, I'm not going to hitchhike home. All right, maybe I can take the bus. And remember, it's like 23 or something, right? All right, well, maybe I can take the train. And then, you know, as the days wore on and the wad in my pocket just kept getting bigger and bigger. And then I said to myself, well, how about taking a cab home? We could do that. And then in the last couple of days, I said to myself, maybe I could fly home, you know, take a flight home. And I called the Aurelia Airport, and Air Canada didn't have any flights going in or out of that airport. And then I phoned the airport itself and asked if they had any flights into Toronto. And that they said that they had a charter flight on a single engine Cessna. And they had that. So I chartered the single engine Cessna and I flew I flew back home. It was only around $100, but that was a lot of money in those days, except I had only had to do 4 readings to get it. And I did that. I went back to Larry's Hideaway. I'd been off work and they were going to fire me for that. And the first thing I did after dropping my bags off, I got a newspaper and I went to the restaurant across the street and I looked for apartments that were furnished. And I found a furnished 1-bedroom apartment at St. Clair and Avenue Road, which was and is a very up-tempo neighborhood. And I went there in a cab. And I saw the apartment and I paid 6 months rent in advance. And I went back to Larry's Hideaway and I put everything that I had or that I could put in that I owned, that I could put in a taxi cab, and I took it to back to that apartment. And I didn't go back to Larry's Hideaway again for several years after that. And that's how I then became a performing psychic.
That's an awesome story. Yeah. And it's just so unsupported, and you just did it. And I mean, obviously there were
that's my theory in life. Just do it. You know, don't think about it. Just do it. And when I teach people to be psychic, actually, when I show them that they are, what I start off with saying is, become aware of what's obvious. When you become aware of what's obvious, more becomes obvious. And when you become more aware of what's obvious, then more becomes obvious again. And the more you focus on what's obvious, eventually you'll get to a point where what's obvious to you is not obvious to others. And that is the way you do it, is that awareness. And that's how you just start off, become aware of what's obvious. So an example, this has been my life practice. I've done this. This is what I've done and what I was born to do. But I also have other interests and have had avocations, a lot of different avocations in my life. They've been really varied. And there was one period in my life where I got interested in painting the inside of houses. And like anything I do, I get really obsessed with. And for example, in the house that first house I bought, I lived there for 5 years. I painted that house inside 5 different times in the 5 years I lived there because I like to paint. And then I painted my friends' houses and stuff like that. And I thought I was getting really good at it. And I even had like, a professional, a business account at a couple of different paint stores. That's how much I was painting, but still doing readings and stuff. And a guy I knew who was a builder, his name is Hugh O'Malley. He also was a finishing carpenter as well. One day he dropped by my place, and I had just finished painting the living room. It was like the 5th time. And when he walked in, because he'd never been in my place before, when he walked in, he looked around and said, "Who did the paint job? I hope you didn't pay them." And I was shocked, because usually when people walked in, they would say, "Wow, great paint job." What I, ultimately figured out was that's not what they were saying. What they were saying was, "I like the color." And when Hugh said, who did the paint job, I knew he was seeing something that I wasn't seeing. And I said to him, "Show me why you say that." And then he showed me the mistakes that I made that I hadn't seen. And then I did see them. And I never unsaw them again. So much so that all these years later, when I go into a place, I see the mistakes. And because they're obvious. And he saw them because they were obvious. And as I became more aware of what's obvious, I became more clearer in seeing the finer mistakes and more. Now, I don't look for mistakes when I'm doing a psychic reading. I look at, right off the bat, I look at what's obvious. I also don't worry about, am I being clairvoyant? Am I being a telepath? Am I being an empath? I don't care. In my work, it's coming up with the answer. So, like I said just before we started today, if you take a math test, if you just give the answer, you don't get all the marks. You get the marks for knowing how to get to the answer. In my job, it's getting the answer. And I get the answer, that's what I focus on. And I don't care what you call it. I focus on the answer. And I've always been like that, but there was this one time where it really was hammered home. Again, this was when I was in my late 20s, and I was touring regularly across Canada. And I was in a small city in Ontario. That's a province of Canada. In the US, you call them states. We call them provinces. And it's right in the middle of the snow belt. And when I was in that place, they had the largest snowfall, the greatest in 50 years. I remember that very clearly. And I was staying at the Holiday Inn. And this man came to me for a reading. He was an older guy. I had a brief conversation with him, and he told me that he was retired. And I said, "What did you do when you were working?" And he said to me, I was a court stenographer. And I said, "That's fascinating. How many words a minute can you write?" And he said, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, how can you be a stenographer and not know how many words you can write?" And he said, "I just wrote down what the people said." I thought, yes. And that's where I realized, focus on the answer.
Yeah. No filters.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. So, and I've worked with the RCMP. I've worked on cases where life and death was on the line. I did things that I saw that now people are putting a label on. They're saying, oh, well, that's remote viewing. Well, it didn't matter what it was called. What I was doing was looking for the answer. I was involved with a book a few years ago, and the name of the book now is called The Perfect Predator. And I helped keep a man alive who was dying. I'm not the star of the book. There are others that had a greater role, but the role that I played, my minor role hadn't been played by somebody who does what I can do. And there are lots of people that can, somebody that couldn't do what I would do, the patient would have died. What had happened is he contracted the most potent superbug on the planet. And it was 100% antibiotic resistant. It meant that if you get that, you die. That's prognosis. And he also happened to have been a client of mine. And his wife also happened to have been a client of mine. And in fact, his wife had been a client of mine for almost 30 years. And she is a renowned epidemiologist. And she's a Toronto girl. And I did the first reading for her when she just completed her PhD. And now she's currently, and I can tell you a lot about her because there's a book about the two of them that have been written. Stephanie also is a professor of epidemiology at the University of Southern California, associate dean of epidemiology at the Southern California. She's has connections, and she's renowned for her advanced research in AIDS virus. Her husband, Tom, also is a professor at the same university. He has a PhD in psychiatry, and he's a professor of experimental psychology. He's the one that caught the virus, the infection. A year before, I had done a reading for Tom. And Tom he reminded me of like Indiana Jones kind of guy. He's like a really macho. He's like 6'5", and he's got this great big deep thundering voice, and he's brilliant as well. Like this guy has it all. In his later years, he had ballooned up to over 300 pounds, and I had done a reading for him before this, a year and a half before this happened, and the way I do readings, it's not the way I started out at the tea room. But when I tune into somebody now, most of the time I see their life from conception, although not the details of it. So I see their life from conception until completion. And once again, not necessarily the details. I sense it. And it's just there. And it's something that has been starting, that I've been working on for, 30 of the 50 years I've been doing this, maybe a little bit more. So when and I didn't put a label on it, I just gave people information. When I'm giving bad news, and I give bad news, I don't like to give bad news, but I do it. And the way I do it is I look into the future and I describe to that person the positive results of the negative thing that they're going to go through. And I just talk about what they're going to experience in the future, drop the subject, because I don't tell them the negative thing. I tell them the positive result. Then I come up with other things that I'm doing the reading about. Then I come back and give them another hint about the positive side. And then I mention a suggestion of the negative. And then I go back to the positive end result. And sometimes I'll take 20 minutes or half an hour or 40 minutes to actually get to this shitty thing's going to happen to you. But by the time I get there, they're already aware and they're already prepared for the solution. So I've been doing that, or I'll describe things for people in the future and how they'll deal with things. And that prepares them.
So they can change their own timeline.
So they can change and take control. That's
take
correct.
control. Yeah,
absolutely.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. That's because nothing's written in stone. If you can.
Absolutely. If you can see it, you can change it.
Yeah.
Destiny you cannot see because it can't be changed. So if you can see it, you can change it. And so I give people information in how they can process it, experience it the way they want to. That's how I give negative information. And when I was doing a reading for Tom, and he had, he turned into, the size of a mountain. And I said to him, in 3 years from now, you're going to be at the physically healthiest point in your life. You're going to be more than 130 pounds lighter, and you're going to look great. And then I changed the subject, and then I came back to it, and then I mentioned about a problem, and then I changed the subject. And throughout the whole time, I prepared him of what was going to come. And by the time I had finished, he was then aware of what was going to happen. And he knew how or what to do if it happened. Him and Stephanie went away on a vacation, a dream vacation, to Egypt. And when they were touring incidentally, I told him about the infection, the illness, and I told him that he would be as sick as he could possibly get without dying. Or he could take care of his health. And either way, he would survive nonetheless. And I basically said to him, it's up to you. You can do it the easy way. You can do it the hard way. And they went away on this vacation. They were touring one of the pyramids, and Tom passed out. And he got carried out of the pyramid and taken back to the hotel. And then the doctor came, and then he was moved to the hospital, where he contracted the most potent superbug on the planet. And when you got that, you died because there was no cure. And Stephanie, the scientist as well, I told Stephanie that she could find the cure. And I created a mental psychic link with Tom when he was in a coma. And I lived and breathed that 24 hours a day for over 8 months. And I saw that Tom was going to survive. And I told Stephanie that she could find a cure for this incurable disease. Stephanie was renowned in her area of research as an epidemiologist. And she created a team of people with a psychic in the background. And I was tuned into Tom 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I knew when he was in trouble. I knew when he was okay. I knew when things were changing. And every day I had a meeting with Stephanie about where Tom was at. And at the same time, Stephanie created a group of scientists around the world that put all their focus into coming up with a cure for that superbug while Tom was in a coma dying. And there were 3 different times when Tom was letting go, and his spirit, his soul was getting ready to leave his body. And I sensed it and pointed out to Stephanie what Tom needed. And in that time period, in those 3 times, Tom would have died had a psychic, not just me, because there are lots of people around that could do this too. It was just, my call at the Union Hall. Milne, it's your turn, your number's up. It was just one of those. But had a psychic not been involved, Tom would have died. And our work that I share with everybody, our work saved Tom from that dying when he was unconscious. At the same time, I was working with Stephanie and had meetings with her every day as well. And then she had her meetings with her scientists, and they came up with a cure. And at the very end, it was narrowed down to 3 different options. And in this situation, there was only enough time, they could use one of those 3. And when she was making her choice, she ran them by me. But she had talked to all the brilliant scientists on the planet as well. And at the very end, she said, what do you think, Robert? And she started off with saying to me, okay, we've narrowed them down to 3. And the first one, she said, is called phages. And as soon as she said that, I said, that's the one. And she said, well, wait a minute, wait, because there's 2 more. And I said, yeah, well, that's the one. And she said, you don't even know what it does. And I said, that's the one. And then she said, well, let's look at the other ones. And I said, okay, that's the one. And she told me about the other 2. And I just said, that's the one. And she said, okay, why is that the one? And I said, because it's like little Pac-Man, and they're going to attack the super virus, attack it, eat it, and kill it. And she said, that's what it's supposed to do. And now, not on my word, I don't get the gold medal for that. On my word, though, it tipped the scale, and she chose phages. Phages, incidentally, is harvest from sewer water. And what it is excrement. And in the 1930s and late 20s in Russia, they were doing experiments with ingesting or infecting people with lower organ illnesses by injecting live fresh stool in their body, and they were getting results. And then penicillin came along. So, the research stopped. So, because, basically you had a choice, a pill or a turd. So, most people went for the pill. So that was the end of phage research. When all the superbugs started running rampant, science started looking for old cures. And that was one of them. Yeah. And Tom was within hours of dying before he got his first injection. And like I said, he was in a coma that whole time. And the doctors didn't know whether if they injected him or not, he was going to die. which one of the reasons they held it back. So anyway, that night they gave Tom, when he was on his deathbed, like he'd lost he was like a skeleton, and in a coma. Anyway, he was injected with phages, and he didn't die. And like half an hour later, or a bit longer, his vital signs got a little bit stronger. So let's give him another shot, and then they did. And then a little while later, his vital signs improved, and throughout the night, they just kept zapping him with these phages. The next morning, Stephanie went to the hospital, and she went up to her husband's on the bed when he'd been injected all night. And when she got to him, he came out of his coma and he opened his eyes and he looked at her and then fell asleep. And he never went back into a coma again. And he continued to come back. It was a long process. Had a psychic, not me, just had a psychic not been involved, Tom would have done. And I share this with everybody. But that was one of the big ones.
That's a very emotional and kind of so was it fate? Was it psychic? What was all involved? There were lots of hands involved in that.
Absolutely.
Story.
Absolutely. And so, my role was minor because Stephanie's role, and incidentally, the name of the book is called The Perfect Predator. I mentioned
there's a link to it in the comments. So.
Yeah. And I'm mentioned in that scientific book. It's written by a scientist for scientists. And I, as a psychic, am acknowledged and written in that book 26 or 27 times. And Stephanie acknowledges that, well, for a scientist, this is pretty powerful words. If Robert weren't involved, Tom may not have lived, which is really that's an endorsement even from a scientist. That's an endorsement from a scientist. And I share that with the people who do my work.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about your workshop, because we're getting to the end of the show.
Oh yeah, already? What?
Yeah,
oh.
I know. Your stories are fascinating.
Okay.
A lecture. Well, yeah, this is a lecture. We're not doing readings on day. Robert's links, if you want to connect with him, are in the video description.
Yes.
So I'm sure he has a calendar that you can hook up with him personally. And
yes. I still do. I'm still doing readings. I will.
You still need to pay the bills, right?
I still need to pay the bills, and it's what I do.
It's your part of your life. It's your life.
It's the
life's calling, obviously.
It is. And when I no longer am able to do readings, then I've completed my existence. It's been the purpose. And
they're already asking for you to come back on soon and share some more of your stories. So.
Well,
yeah.
Oh, thanks. So we've got this class coming up sometime in July. It's going to be 4 or 5 weeks where I'll be showing, teaching people that they're psychic and how to be psychic and how to do psychic readings. And it's going to be a 4 or 5 week workshop. And we will be focusing on the basics. However, we also will also incorporate, some of the words that used to describe it. But what that class and that program's all about is being psychic and bringing out what you want.
And it's an online course, so
it's an online course.
Anybody in the world can join in.
Anybody in the world can join in, and everybody in the world can join in.
Oh,
like to have you all come say hi.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Melinda, who's a regular of ours, said, just time just flew by. Everything was very fascinating.
Thank you.
So, can you show us your crystal ball, because we know that's your favorite crystal?
Well,
there it is behind you.
Yeah, there it is. I've had it for 40 years or so. I don't use it to peer into. It sits beside me when I do readings, and while I sort of say it has no esoteric meaning, it's been with me for tens of thousands of psychic readings. There's a lot of energy in it, and that's it there.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful piece.
And it really is. And, I remember one of my stepchildren, when I first got it, looked into it and said, how do you make it work, So.
Yeah. We've had some people saying, too bad you weren't around during COVID and could have figured that one out. I could say.
Well, I was around. I was around during COVID.
I'm not working on the COVID problem. And I think even if you came up with an easy solution, nobody would have listened to you, because that's not what COVID was.
That's probably true. Yeah.
So.
Well, if I would have been, and I was hesitant about making predictions around that, because no matter what you would say, whether you liked it or didn't like it, some group would attack you. So I was rather careful with that, and I do my best to stay away from politics or things like that. My focus in life is being aware of what's obvious and getting the answer, and that's pretty much what I think about most of the time. So in getting the answer is I have to be aware of what's in front of me, and that's how I've lived my life. I've taken care of what's in front of me.
And your song, your theme song?
I'm trying to remember.
High Hopes.
Oh yeah, another one. I think that that one, High Hopes. Another one that would be something. When I die, the version of Over the Rainbow, where the guy talks, the great big Samoan guy sings over the rainbow. That would be what I would use, or suggest to use at my funeral or life celebration. So that would be. What was the other one I said? Because
oh my gosh, it was Frank Sinatra. No.
Well, High Hopes, yeah.
Oh, Wonderful World.
Yeah,
well, okay. Yes, Wonderful World too. That also is one of them. And
I take it you're still in Toronto.
I still am in Toronto. I don't tour very much anymore. It's I don't need to because of the internet, and I'm just. Currently, I'm recuperating from quadruple bypass surgery, but I am working now, and I'm not working a full-time schedule, but I certainly am slaving over my hot crystal ball 2 or 3 times every day.
Oh, that's awesome.
Awesome.
I asked you if you'd seen UFOs, and you haven't, but then you live in Toronto and you've seen lots stranger things. So
every night outside my place,
So true. Being, your sky's obscure. There's all sorts of weird stuff going on.
Well,
met
and when I'm focusing on the problem in front of me, I often don't look up into the sky. What I'm looking at is solving the issue that's in my face at that time. So that's where my focus is. So I'm not really that interested in what goes on somewhere else, but in the moment, I'm just concentrating on the answer. And I don't care how I get to that answer. That's the purpose, get the answer. And it doesn't matter how you get to it, just get to it.
Right.
Very cool. Very cool. Teresa, have you got any questions?
Oh no, I was barely enjoying myself. I love your stories.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And it's great that you were never arrested. I'm really happy about that. No witch burnings, and the last one.
Not even for offenses unrelated to being psychic. I've never been arrested either.
That's very good to know. Very good to know. You've been a delight, and I'm so glad. And I'm so glad you're recovered and on your way to even a better recovery now.
Thank you.
I just wish you all the best. Just one more piece of business before we go. Did you write down, Teresa, who was the winner?
I wrote it down. We have the winner. So every week we look at the comments and who's ever shared out the show. So you can share it out on Facebook. You can share it out on YouTube. And the winner is, from last week, Brenda Mendoza. Woo!
Yeah, good. So,
congratulations.
And what does Brenda win?
What Brenda wins, which one is she going to win?
The Avalon one, sure.
We have a meditation, and this one goes back to Avalon with Merlin and the Lady of the Lake. And
it's a guided meditation.
Dragons and things like I like. And so, it's just a nice meditation, and you get to look inside and find answers for yourself during the meditations. So it's kind of like an activation as well.
Yeah, meditation and some Reiki healing and some words of wisdom and with people. So that's what we do. It's like a little mini mind spa for 30 minutes. That's what we call it. So
sounds interesting. It sounds great.
Sounds interesting. Well, thank you. And you stay on with us for a minute, and I'm just going to end the broadcast. But thank you, everyone, for joining us, and be with us next week when Catherine Patterson's going to be joining us and talking about 5 magical herbs that you can find in your neighborhood and their uses. So it's going to be fun. It'll be fun. Thanks very much.